Good afternoon. Let's go ahead and get started, please. Welcome to the first community of interest that's sort of organically grown by the faculty, but sponsored by the Office of the Vice President for Research, Innovation, and Economic Development. Thanks for coming today. What we're going to do is two major pieces. We're going to have our Ignite talks first, where 14 people are going to talk for 5 minutes each, showing you some of their ideas or their research dealing with diversity, equity, and poverty. And then we're going to have a social time where you have 15 minutes, 4 15-minute periods to go to any of the tables where one of the speakers are standing and expand on those things. We have food and wine at that particular time. We appreciate you here. I want to introduce the Vice President for Research, Innovation, Economic Development, Dr. Ramesh Kolaru, and he wants to say a few words to you.
Good afternoon. I'll keep it brief, but I want to thank all of you for coming here, and I certainly want to thank Jack, Dominique, and the steering committee from the research office and the steering committee of faculty who have helped achieve something that I've been dreaming for about 3.5 years now. So thank you for making this happen. Typically, in the 3.5, 4 years that I've been Vice President for Research, I have run into a lot of interesting research on our campus where we have extraordinary faculty doing phenomenal things. And what I found is that while we do extraordinary things within our own areas of focus, the real beauty of research is the opportunity to transcend our discipline and cut across multiple disciplines. And it seemed like we didn't do enough to facilitate that. Not that we needed to direct it by any stretch of the imagination, but on our campus, we did fuel that engine, if you will, by creating opportunities for these kinds of planned or serendipitous collisions, where people come together from across different disciplines, but connected by a theme. And one of those themes that we wanted to begin this journey with is something that is so near and dear to all of our hearts, and that is to address through research, as a modern research university should, address some of the most challenging issues that we face as a global society. And so it was indeed truly valuable for us to begin this journey of these communities of interest with something that we care about deeply as scholars and researchers. But as folks in a day-to-day modern society, we want to make sure that we inform through research what it is that we practice as we seek to improve not only on our campus issues of diversity, equity, and poverty, but in the larger society. So I want to thank each of you for doing your part, for being here, for being involved in these TED Talks, if you will, where you have 3 minutes to put your passion out, and do that in a manner that communicates your vision and your view of the world, and how you seek to shape it and transform it through your research and through your own innovative ideas. But to also have that happen to where it is not just your ideas, but those ideas coming together to make a beautiful symphony, if you will, because you indeed will have an opportunity for a speed date on steroids, if you will. So I'm super excited that this is happening, and this is the first of many we will have on our campus, where the topics might be different, but the concept will continue to be bringing these communities of researchers and scholars and practitioners from across multiple disciplines on our campus together, united by that theme. Coming out of these possible are research centers, research institutes, research collaborations, and if nothing else, a great glass of wine and camaraderie, which we should continue to have on our campus. So I want to thank all of you, and my applause to each of you for making this happen. I look forward to a great afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Rex. If you didn't get a handout, please feel free to get one at the break. They have a lot of additional information about communities of interest in them. I want to introduce Dr. Pearson Cross, who is our moderator for today. He's Associate Dean in Liberal Arts. I think he's acting department head in criminal justice, radio commentator, political commentator on television. He's our real media star, and so he agreed to be our moderator for the day. Pearson.
Thank you. And welcome, everyone. Thanks for coming. As you heard, we're trying to do something a bit different today for our first Community of Interest meeting. We're doing these Ignite talks. 14 presenters are going to present for 5 minutes. I'm sure when Vice President Kohler said 3 minutes, they all had a heart attack. But no, it's actually 5 minutes each. They're going to tell us about their research interests, their ideas in the area of diversity, equity, and poverty. The slides they prepared are focused on visual presentation rather than a lot of reading, so they'll be providing that. By the way, if you notice, there's a hashtag down there, so tweeting on this is encouraged. So if you see the bottom left there, that hashtag COIDEP_UL. So I would encourage you, if you find something that really excites your interest, to tweet on that or tweet on this conference so that people know actually what we're doing. As Dr. D'Amico said, there's going to be a social and discussion period afterwards. With that said, I think everything's been said, so let's get right to it. Starting off today with our very first presentation, it's going to be Dr. Dana Stahokovic. Oh, that's the list I have, I'm sorry. Is that not you? Yes?
I am. It's Stahoviak. You were close.
Stahoviak. Okay, my bad. She's going to talk awareness to building critical consciousness among faculty, re-envisioning diversity in higher education.
I think so. No pressure being first. Okay, so I'm Dana Stahoviak. I'm from the College of Education, and the presentation that I'm doing today is based off of an article that I wrote for the National Education Association's Thought and Action Journal on raising awareness, from raising awareness to building critical consciousness among faculty. I'm just going to put my Twitter handle up there if you want to go ahead and tweet me. I need more followers. I don't have enough. I look at my number grow small every day. So if you don't mind doing that, tweeting some stuff out, asking me questions, you can also email me at that email or whatever else is in the program. When I do conferences, I like to first set intentions. So these are a couple questions that I think are really important for us to think about throughout the day, but as I talk as well. So I'd just like you to take a second to think about how you might answer those for yourself. And I want you to think about how we define diversity. Normally when we define diversity, we put forth initiatives that oftentimes fall flat and don't necessarily meet the needs that we set out to meet. And so today I want to talk about how we can advance our thinking. So diversity initiatives are really good in that they raise awareness, but that's really not enough. What I argue that we need to do is raise critical consciousness, not just about diversity, but also about issues of equity, power, privilege, and oppression. And these are topics we don't often talk about. So when I'm talking about this, I'm talking about moving from diversity to thinking with a social justice mindset, moving from raising an awareness to social action and transformation and change. Social justice means action. So how do we define diversity or social justice? Social justice is oftentimes defined as both a process and a goal. And the goal at the end of that is for there to be some type of transformational change. One of the first things we can do in thinking about social justice is start to think about equity versus equality. On the left here, you see this is equity. Everybody has the same resources, but not the same access. This is equity. We need to talk about this. Everybody has access and resources that they need, dependent on them. But even when we talk about equity, we need to think about critical questions such as why do some people have access and others don't? How did they get the access? And then when they finally got the access, where did those resources come from? And then even further, when we're thinking about social justice, we need to think about how do we make it so every single person has access and gets that access in the way that's best for them. And if we look at this last picture, they're liberated, they all have access. I'm not sure why it's coming up like that, but one of the things that we can first start doing when we think about this, thinking about critical consciousness, so we need to think about that in two different places. The first one is at the structural level, which we know really well, which is how universities and institutions are set out. But then also the most important that we oftentimes forget about is at the personal level, where we need to think about our positionality and our identity. So what pieces of our identity, our race, our gender, our sexual orientation play into the system, and how are they also affected by the system? And a couple of ways that we can do that is by actually naming these parts of our identity, and then thinking about what parts of my identity are part of the majority, and what parts of my identity are part of the minority. And when I talk about majority, what I mean is people who have privilege, and by that I mean people who are white, straight, upper class Christian, cisgender, able-bodied. Those are all who are the majority, and minority is the opposite of that, people of color, women, whatnot. The next thing that we can do is think about what are the things that we bring to our communities, and we usually stop at what do we bring with our mind to the community, but what else do we bring to the community that's so important that we can add? So what are our assets? So once we start thinking about all these ways that we can be more critically conscious within ourselves, how do we bring that to our faculty and our staff and the people in our community? What are ways that we can do that? And the Arcus Center for Social Justice at Kalamazoo College offers 5 different things that we could do based in social justice leadership. One of them is we can inspire unity, bring people together. Another one is to spark intellectual growth, which today is a really great example of sparking intellectual growth. Nurture leadership, build critical community. This is a little bit different than traditional community. This is places that we can actually have these deep conversations about privilege, power, and oppression, and then embrace change even when it's uncomfortable. So how do we do this work? The bottom line is we need to start thinking about diversity as bringing our awareness, and then we need to move even further and think about what are the ways in which we can actually institute transformation in change so that we see movement and we see people getting access in ways that are equitable. So I want to thank you for listening to me today. Please join me today for conversation, and if you don't make it to my table, email me or tweet me. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Stohovia. Our next presentation is going to be by Dr. Sonia Shi, Recruiting Women to Cyberspace Security. Dr. Shi is Informatics Program Coordinator, Associate Professor, School of Computing and Informatics.
Thank you. This is actually tax day. How many of you actually filed the taxes already? I filed mine 2 days ago. And in the same time, I have to file for my son, which I can get the limited refund for him. And what happened is, when I file, what's going on? And they come up with a text messaging saying that the tax return with the same security number number has been submitted. So you cannot e-file second time. What happened? So I constantly, I was thinking maybe a software issue, maybe a networking issue, so I filed the second time. Guess what happened? I missed 1 digit. I don't know my son's correct social security number. This is what happened, just really kind of one incident. So cybersecurity, actually I'm running late. So cybersecurity is this, anywhere in the electronic world have a security issue. You need to protect whatever information you have in there. Social security is really number 1 key that you need to protect. From your education system, we remove the social security number from your system completely. We use a click ID. We even implemented the banner system with C number, with letter C with a 10-digit number. So we totally remove the social security number out of the system, so nobody even can hack into it. And again, there is a banking industry, there is even homeland security, there is a job everywhere. This is really the point I want to talk today right now, is the current women workforce in ITIS jobs market is about 25%. Okay, so roll down to our education program. I have to be careful because there is a computer science professor right here. So in the School of Computing and Informatics, computer science will probably have 10 to 12% women. In the informatics program, we'll probably have like roughly 18 to 20% women. So going down to the education system, how can we actually bring up the imperative of the woman in the ITIS job force? And this is really something that we want to actually roll out to understand what's going on. So there's a strategy to go with identify potential students with aptitude. Maybe they are, have a chance, have interest, so we can actually encourage them. And then align the message with different stakeholders, potential students, or even somebody interested in this particular field. Outreach to influencer, the school advisor, counselors, or some people we can actually, like me as advisor, we can encourage the minor in the IT. And then possibly we can take advantage of the local computing program, like the school computing and informatics, which we can have like dual enrollment program. We have training workshop and stuff like that. You can actually see a lot of pictures that this is actually my minions. We went to the conference together last year. So coordinate with the industry, possibly we can rally more connection with the industry. Maybe the industry can, the company like CGI and Coral or Profession can provide some on-the-job training or on the education training or train the trainer session for you to actually bring up to the speed and knowing the information of the demands in cybersecurity. And then last, if we can actually track all the activities we're provided to the community and reach out to the different venues, we can actually provide some evidence to attract, leading to the grants, fundraising, or support from the community. Again, women in cybersecurity is really cannot just be done by us, School of Computing and Informatics, but the whole community have to support that venue. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shi. It's amazing how fast these slides go by. Huh? Wow, what a challenge.
Can you hear me? Hello?
The next presentation is going to be by Dr. Robert Slater. He's interim head of the department, SLIMCO. He's the Department of Educational Foundations and Leadership. He's the endowed professor of education. His presentation is going to be called Our Teachers' Knowledge of Science.
Okay, can you hear me? Yes. Okay, good. How much do our teachers, K-12 teachers in particular, know about science? We don't really know, and today I'm just going to give you some clues about what they might know or might not know about science. And the reason why this is important, of course, is that it should have something to do with how much our kids know about science. There should be a connection, although there are arguments about it. There are many factors that influence our kids' knowledge of science, but we assume that teachers' knowledge would have some connection to that. I'm going to show you in just a moment, as soon as this slide cycles, some information. Here we go. This is the average NAEP science scores, 2009-11 for our kids, 0 to 300 to the scale, all students 150, fourth graders, 2009, eighth graders 150. You can see in 2011 it went up 2 points. Another marginal increase. And as a result, and then also you can see that our international scale, these are the PISA results. We are here. This is the science. We are ranking about 25 out of these countries. Some of these countries are statistically insignificant differences, but these are certainly ahead of us. We're down about the middle of the pack. And this is somewhat disconcerting. In 2011, the average science score of U.S. 8th graders was higher than the TIMSS scale average. This is TIMSS, which is set at 500. At grade 8, the United States was among the top 23 education systems in science. 12 education systems had higher averages, and 10 were not measurably different, and scored higher on average than 33 education systems. Depends on what scale you use, but generally, people are not happy with our scores, international comparison of scores in science. Let's assume again that our kids' knowledge of science is correlated with our teachers' knowledge of science. Before I move into some facts or some of the clues that we have about our teachers' knowledge of science, in this next slide cycles, we can see some of the data. Let me say that I'm going to use today the General Social Survey data, which I'll say more about in just a second. It is the largest and most reliable data we have on the American population. It's funded by the National Science Foundation. It's administered by the National Opinion Research Center. The GSS is an almost annual survey that's been done since 1972. So we have about 40 years of data. There are 5,597 variables, 57,000 plus respondents, time trends for 2479 variables, 363 trends have 20 plus data points. All the differences I'm going to be talking about are significant at 0.05 level or less. Something about our teachers. There are 3.7 million K-12 teachers in this country. It's the largest occupation, one of the largest. It would fill 37 Rose Bowls. Most teachers are women, 80%, about 50-50 men, women in high school. Most teachers are white, middle-aged, and have 2 kids. Here's a question that was asked. Does the earth go around the sun or does the sun go around the earth? 21% of Americans got this wrong. What's more disconcerting is that 11% of teachers got this wrong. And let me say that when you look at, calculate what that means in terms of the numbers, 3.7 million teachers, 95% confidence limits on this, or 7 to 15. If just 7% of teachers don't know whether the earth revolves around the sun or vice versa, we're looking at 259,000 teachers teaching 5 million kids each day science, and they don't know whether the sun goes around the earth or earth goes around the sun or vice versa. Here's another question. Antibiotics kill viruses as well as bacteria. 23% of our teachers got that wrong. Again, do the math, we're talking about 3 times what it was with the previous question, so it could be as many as 15 million kids. There are about 60 million K-12 kids in the country. 15 million kids are being taught by teachers that don't know the answer to that. This question is, would you say that astrology is very scientific, sort of scientific, or not at all scientific? K-12 teachers. Astrology scientific, 19% felt that astrology is scientific. I have the general public got a little more of it wrong, but it's still disconcerting to find out that. And there are more slides like that. But in summary, anywhere from 6 to 14% of teachers did not know the continents were once joined. About 8% did not know the center of the earth is hot. About 18% did not know that the father's gene decides whether the baby is boy or girl. Over 10% say that the sun never shines at the South Pole. Okay. So what do we conclude? Too many of our K-12 teachers appear to be ignorant of basic science. We need more research to find out whether GSS clues are in fact the case. If we discover that it is the fact that teachers have this kind of gaps in their science knowledge, we need to do some serious development for our teachers and other measures as well, perhaps about admission into teacher training programs. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Shirley. Next, we're going to hear from Dr. Jack D'Amico, who's Assistant Vice President for Research and Innovation, Economic Development. He's going to speak differentiating language differences from language disabilities.
Okay. As a linguist and a speech language pathologist, I'm interested in the way that people use language and the ways that language is used to categorize individuals. One of the things I want to talk about today specifically is a problem in applied linguistics. How do we differentiate children with language differences from those people with language disabilities? Let me give you a bit of context on why that's important. In the United States, we tend to characterize students in our classrooms based on their success in learning. We characterize them as normal versus exceptional children. Exceptional children are those who have intrinsic language learning problems of some kinds. In this sense, language disabilities. Now, why is this important? It's important because these kids are often placed in special education. And in special education, although there are some problems with it, it's better than the alternative if a child has a true language learning impairment. They can get their needs met and they don't have to compete always with kids who are more efficient and effective learners in the schools. However, proper identification is crucial in this situation. If we put children who are language different in these kinds of programs, there are problems because language different children need programs and approaches that are different from those with disabilities. The wrong programming causes problems in this kind of situation. So that's not so easy to do. And one of the reasons it's not so easy to do is because when a child has difficulties, those difficulties are similar whether the child has the difficulties due to disabilities or differences. They're the same symptoms even though there are different causes because there's only a certain number of manifestations of language learning, academic learning, socialization, and communication that can happen. So how do we differentiate these kids? This is a goal of our language research group that we're trying to do. One of the things that we're trying to do over a number of years. We've investigated in several kinds of areas. We've investigated, for instance, looking at language testing research, including our own, looking at various kinds of language analyses to determine if we can see differences versus disabilities in children who are in the process of learning English as a second language. We've done academic analyses. We've looked at initiatives like response to intervention, and we've also done some things dealing with specialized aspects of bilingualism. Here's some things that we know. We know that language assessment due to norm reference testing doesn't work very well with this population. One of the reasons for that is because their norm reference language tests aren't valid. Another thing is most of them are designed in English and then translated to another language. But with language structure, you don't have a one-to-one correspondence between one language and another, even if they're very similar languages. We also know that a focus on structural aspects of language isn't a very good way to differentiate because grammar and syntax, at least superficial aspects of it, tell you more about where someone learned their language than their underlying language proficiency. Code switching doesn't differentiate. That's one of those special areas, because we know even children with language learning difficulties who are bilingual don't violate structural constraints of code switching. What have we learned as solutions to this in our particular situation in our group? 5 things that we're seeing right now. The first thing that we're seeing in this kind of situation is that when we're dealing with trying to differentiate these kids, it's better to look at language function rather than language structure. The reason is because even though language structure doesn't have a one-to-one correspondence between one language and another, language function, language use can have a one-to-one correspondence because we don't have to tie it to syntax and morphology. Second, we know that descriptive assessment works better than psychometric assessment because of the validity problems and the other kinds of problems with norm reference standardized tests. And so good observation, good linguistic analyses are ways that we can work with this. We know that eye tracking is one of the methodologies, looking at the eye tracking, how the eye is used by individuals who are bilingual to construct meaning versus those that aren't, give us some possible ways of differentiating these particular kinds of groups. And there are some interventions or innovations like response to intervention. If the response to intervention, if the methods that are used are appropriate to second language children, these can help us differentiate the kids because over a short period of time we see how well they can learn. And lastly, we know that we can employ different approaches to language interpretation and analysis, particularly a bi-level analysis where we have a 2-stage kind of interpretation. Descriptive analysis where we simply ask, is this person a good or lousy communicator, versus interpretive analysis, why are they lousy communicators? We need, in terms of collaborators, we need people who know language-specific situations, statistical collaboration, access to bilingual populations in the school is important, and we need people with fresh ideas to help us here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. D'Amico. Next, we're going to hear from Dr. Craig Forsyth. He is a Picard Center Scholar and a professor in the Department of Sociology, and he's going to be talking about control theory.
Hi, how you doing? I'm a criminologist, which means I've studied deviance, crime, and delinquency. Those, they sound like similar things, but they're very different things. And I'm going to talk about control theory today, which is a very unique theory. The slide is going too slow. Social control theory is the only theory that's geared toward the behavior of young people. And one of the things, I talked about this, psychologists years ago, they tried to use a sociopathic scale on juveniles. It doesn't work. All juveniles are sociopathic. The first thing, it assumes that all young people are bad. So that's the thing. So that's its basic assumption. So the question is how to control them, rather than most crime theories that ask, why is the person criminal? This is, why does the person conform? Because they were born to be criminals. The 7 versions of control theory, they all ask the question, the same question: what makes kids conform? So if your kid is acting bad, the good thing about it is he's okay. If he sounds like Ronald Reagan, you got a problem. Okay, there's various ways you can measure this. You can use observation, self-report. It surveys. It uses a combination of risk and protective factors. Risk make kids bad. Protective factors make kids good. It's very easy. It's very easy to measure. It's usually on. I'm trying to get my head to here. It's usually on 4 dimensions: peers, parents, school, and community. That's all there is. There's nothing else to control your kids with, right? And so if you, sorry to say, I guess I'm faster than I think I'm at my age. Yeah. This is very slow, guys. D'Amico should have had this. He can stretch anything out. You want to come back up? Okay. Here's the expectations. It's very simple. If you're high on risk, you're going to be high on bad behavior. And the risk factors are easily measured. It's a series of questions. I've used self-report. At P-card, we have the CCYS, we have the community assessments. We have the PEAK that Ray's going to talk about, and all that's about the same thing. And so if you're low on protective factors, if you're high on protective factors, then you're going to have you'll be low on bad behaviors. Okay. Peers have bad habits, parents have bad behaviors, schools have bad environments, and communities do not reinforce social norms, which is very important. If you remember several years ago, the inner cities went back, we're going to take back the night. The night, that was the movement that reinforces community needs norms. Okay. So examples of protective factors: peers that conform, parents that offer support for good behavior, attachment to school, people in community reward good behavior. Right. I realized after this how bad a parent I was, but yes, you probably do. So some of the hypotheses you can come out of this with: honor will produce good outcomes. If you have high honor, we have questions that tap into honor. Urban environment should be high on protective factors in the urban environment. And I'm from New Orleans, so I don't really believe that. But risk factors will produce bad outcomes. The primary data. Okay, here we go. This is great for deductive research. You have the theories, you can touch. It's direct. It's great. It is not great for inductive research, but for the deductive research, for theory testing, it is. It's fantastic. Here's some things we found out that don't exactly match up, right? Gifted delinquents. I looked around the state and I controlled for gifted and delinquents in it. I found 19 gifted delinquents in the state. That's impossible. You can't have gifted delinquents, right? Delinquents in high-performing schools. You can't have delinquents in high-performing schools. And rural kids carry guns 5 times more than urban kids. That can't happen. See you later.
Thank you, Dr. Forster. Next, we're going to hear from Dr. Ray Bigar, Senior Scientist, Cecil Picard Center for Child Development and Lifelong Learning. His presentation, Prosecutors' Early Intervention Program.
Yep. Let me try to follow that up. I'm going to talk to you about a project that we've been working on for a couple of years at the P-Card Center called the Prosecutors Early Intervention Program. The slide is slow, so I agree with Craig. There we go. It is grounded in control theory, and rather than regurgitate what was just said, you can see that there are specific risk factors like delinquency, substance abuse, poor academic performance. More importantly, PEEP is congruent with some of the juvenile justice reform that's occurring in the state right now. One of the most salient risk factors is a poor parental parent attachment. Oftentimes this leads to ungovernable behavior and global attachment problems with schools and peers and other factors. We also know through research that criminal behavior often begins at a very, very early age. So the more sooner you identify it, address it, the better chance you have at having a positive outcomes because behaviors become habituated. Educators are good at finding kids that have high risk factors. However, they're limited in what they can do to help these kids. In the past, it's always been referring them to FENS, which gets them involved into the justice system. And that's what PEEP tries to avoid. It's a buffer against that. It basically started at a conversation between Phil Haney and his wife, who was a teacher, and she predicted who would show up in his DA's office at some point in time. There were some early studies done on the program that showed that it was effective at reducing truancy, improving emotional and behavioral strength, improving grades, and reducing suspensions. However, this was only applicable to the 6th judicial district. In 2011, a congressional earmark was given to the LDAA to enhance PEEP in existing districts. They were doing PEEP in 5 districts at this time. And so they received some money to do that, and that's where we came on board to figure out how we could enhance this program. It was clear very on that fidelity, data collection were crucial with enhancing the program in all districts. So we basically had to start off with the schema first. We had to get the essential elements of the program defined so we could build this into the system, because all the districts were doing it differently, and this took a lot of time to get the referral, data collection system and all that down. And as you can see, we had to create uniform forms for referral, for classification, for progress monitoring. We had to help all the districts create codes to track the progress of people that matriculated through the program. And on the back end, we created a database to help extract information on a number of metrics, including the types of services, the referrals, successful cases, the number of cases referred to FENS. This has been very challenging on the training aspect. Most of the case managers don't have the capabilities to do this. And so getting them to go to an electronic case management system, it's an understatement to say that it's challenging. So what we learned is PEEP has taken on a life of its own with respect to knowing that a system needed to be built to enhance fidelity and track outcomes. But case managers in there needed to be trained on how to use this system. Right now, we're doing the program in 3 judicial districts, Calcasieu, the 60, which is St. Martin, St. Mary, and Iberia, and Terrebonne Parish. And the evaluation and outcome will happen sometime at the end of this year or early next year. We're going to look at program fidelity, outcomes, data management, system management. The main thing is we're hoping to get this put out statewide and get it geared towards an evidence-based practice. As I said, it's congruent with juvenile justice reform that's going on in the state right now. It's more on rehabilitation through diversion, less on detention, and less on punitive measures, and reducing minority disproportionality that exists in the system. In Calcasieu Parish, they have a place called the Mark. It's a one-stop shop center where a kid is arrested, brought in, assessed, and based on a scoring system, they're either diverted to services or they're put in detention. Subjectivity has been removed. We have an assessment center here in Lafayette Parish that opened in 2013. You can see that individuals that have not gone through this assessment center are more likely to go into detention. Doesn't matter what crime they committed. Going through the assessment center, you see 56% are diverted, 24% are put into detention. So that number has been reduced significantly, and we've also seen a reduction in minority disproportionality as a result of this. So all of this comes together, you know, to hopefully reform juvenile justice in the state, and I think that's it.
That's it.
If you have any questions, come see me at the table. I might answer.
Thank you, Doctor. That's a good one. Our last presenter in this next round is Dr. Natalie Kiefer. She's going to talk about the persistence of deficit perspectives among teachers in Louisiana. Dr. Kiefer is Assistant Professor, Social Science Education, the Department of Curriculum and Instruction.
Good afternoon. So I'm going to be talking to you about a study that I'm currently analyzing the data on the persistence of deficit perspectives among teachers in Louisiana. My theoretical framework begins with Oscar Lewis, who was an anthropologist who wrote a text called The Children of Sanchez. And in that ethnography, which has been criticized for having a limited sample size and therefore a lack of generalizability, he coined this term culture of poverty. Culture of poverty was picked up in public education and has been most recently used by Ruby Payne in her non-peer-reviewed, non-research-based, and self-published framework for understanding poverty. And this is something that we see an awful lot in public education and in institutions of higher education. In tandem with this, the Moynihan Report in 1965 was leaked to the public, and it blamed the matriarchal black family structure for poverty in inner city areas. And of course, social science researchers kind of leapt on all of this, and the term blaming the victim actually came from criticism by social science researchers in response to this. Now, Carol Stack and other anthropologists and other social science researchers noticed that in their own research, there were asset-based perspectives, and they found that there were strong social networks and kinship networks in lower income areas where there was reciprocity between fictive kin and kin. Additionally, at the University of Arizona, the Funds of Knowledge program looked at Latin American communities who were living in poverty and found that there were not all these deficits. There were a host of assets. And so what this actually did was start to shatter and break these myths about people who are living in poverty. For example, we know that people living in poverty aren't lazy. Many of them actually work more hours than their middle class and upper class counterparts, and we get this from the Bureau of Labor and Statistics. We know that poor people living in poverty do value education. They just work so much that they don't have access to schools and access to their teachers during normal work hours, when 60% of the people in our society do not work 9 to 5. So what part of parent-teacher night is actually really about the parents in public education? And I like to say that people living in poverty and middle-class and upper-class people abuse drugs and alcohol. The only difference is the wealthier people get the better stuff. So we see this in the statistics, that it's not just a lower-class issue, and not only that, middle-class and upper-class people are much more likely to be alcoholics. So in my study, what I wanted to look at is this persistence of these deficit perspectives. I had 20 graduate students in an online College of Ed course, and 3 times redundantly throughout the course of the course, I asked them about their understandings of the connections between poverty and academic achievement. And there were some ground rules similar to the ground rules that Dr. Stachowiak talked about during the first presentation. I asked students to have some intellectual humility, to know what they don't know, and to make sure that they were recognizing the difference between informed knowledge that's research-based in their own opinions. And I asked them to let go of anecdotal evidence so that they would be able to see the forest from the trees and be able to look at the bigger picture, as well as to notice their own defensive reactions when they were blasted with asset-based perspectives. They read several chapters out of the Funds of Knowledge text. They read asset-based literature from Paul Gorski, as well as other asset-based literature from Gloria Ladson-Billings. And so I just blasted them with these asset perspectives to see if I could create a shift in their own deficit-laden perspectives about students. And what I found that the responses really ran along the continuum. There were a lot of my students that were really entrenched with their deficit perspectives. But out of the 20, 2 of them actually moved towards this asset-based perspective. So we did see some movement, but it was still deficit-laden movement, and only 2 people actually kind of were willing to accept these asset-based perspectives that they were reading about. So a couple of the different themes. One of them was when they were reading the Funds of Knowledge, a lot of the teachers kind of thought that this whole Funds of Knowledge approach was actually like the culture of poverty versus 2.0, and so that kind of wasn't exactly what I was looking for there. And they also had highly entrenched anecdotal evidence that they just couldn't let go. They kept on talking about that one student that had such a bad life and they lived in poverty. And they just, like I said, they couldn't let go of that. Other themes that we had was this persistence of poverty as a motivator for academic success. And they self-referenced themselves with this idea of being able to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. And so this whole bootstrap myth was something that was in my data. And not only that, there were a lot of teachers who talked about the fact that they were fearful of going and seeing what these students who were living in poverty, what their lives were actually like. So in terms of recommendations, what I would suggest is that we need to have more exposure to asset perspectives in colleges and education. We also need to look at using teachers as researchers going into the communities and into the families and looking at them with a more critical lens at their own perspectives based on the lives of their students that they actually can see firsthand. And there were some positives about the online.
10 seconds, please.
Thank you. There were some positives about the online course in the fact that they felt like they were able to kind of discuss more because they were behind this kind of online veil, so to speak, so they felt a little bit more honest about their approaches. But yes, once again, a traditional classroom would be able to delve into these things in a little bit more depth. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. We're going to take just a minute, and we're going to have our next 7 presenters come up and trade places with the 7 that are down in the stage area. Thank you so much for your presentations up to this point. It's been very illuminating. Sorry about the tight schedule we're on, but one of the things about this presentation method is we try to get through a number of viewpoints and presentations so that we're exposed to a whole bunch of people rather than just a few. This presentation is going to start with Dr. Tanisha Mallory. She is Director of Equity, Diversity, and Community Engagement, Office of Campus Diversity here at UL Lafayette. She's going to talk about a social systems approach to leadership and diversity.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yeah. Great. I'm really excited to share my research with you today. The title of my presentation is A Social Systems Approach to Leadership and Diversity. I like to introduce myself in many different situations as a bridge builder. Many of you know me as a diversity director, but one of the other hats I wear is a researcher. I'm a mathematician and a social scientist, and so I really get excited about opportunities to bring different disciplines together. Primarily, I look at social systems, and what I mean by a social system is a pattern of relationships between individuals, groups, or institutions, and I like to examine those to reveal interesting aspects. When I say social system, many of you may think of social networks, like the really big ones like Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. But what I'm primarily interested in are the relatively smaller networks that occur outside of the online world, that occur out in the real world. So one of the problems that began in my previous role at the Association for American Medical Colleges was to look at how committees come together in a higher education setting to make decisions. So how many of you have served on a committee here at UL? Yeah, quick poll. We have about 90% of you. So you're very familiar with the process of coming together as a group to come to make a decision about some topic. And so that's basically the format of the model for this project. There's so many different examples where we come together as committees to talk about things like undergraduate or graduate admissions, faculty or staff search and hire, even classroom group work. But what this project focuses on is faculty promotion and tenure. And what we've used is this really cool mathematical model that I really worked a lot with in graduate school. It's called the DeGroot model, proposed in 1987 or 84, somewhere around there. But it's a mathematical model to show how groups can make decisions. So as I mentioned, the problem was really to look at a committee, a higher education committee, that's deliberating on a faculty candidate who's being evaluated for promotion from assistant professor to associate professor. And these are two of the main questions that we asked. What criteria are seen as meritorious in the academic promotion and tenure decision process? Many different institutions across the country have different criteria that they think are important when you're looking at promotion of faculty. And also, how does the diversity of the committee, how does the diversity of the individuals around the table impact the decision outcome? So when we talk about diversity, we mean more than just race and ethnicity. We mean things like gender. We mean things like the level of experience, whether they're assistant professors or full professors on the committee. So to address these questions, what my collaborators and I did was to design a simulation. It took place at the Association of American Medical Colleges conference in 2015 that was focused on diversity and faculty affairs. And we recruited 31 participants from the conference attendees. We carefully crafted 4 fake committees. We carefully crafted them in regards to demographics of the committee members. And each of our committee members received, in advance of the conference, a fake dossier of the candidate that was being considered for promotion. It included things like the candidate's academic statement. It included a department chair's letter of support, also a description of the fake institution that the candidate came from. But then when they arrived for the deliberation, we gave them an additional piece of information. We gave them a photo of the candidate. With the exception of the photo of the candidate, everything else they received was identical. So you can see how we were looking at how the impact of race of a candidate has an impact on the decision that they make. We're still analyzing the results from this pilot study, but there's been really interesting things and themes that have emerged. And I'll share a few of them with you today. So our participants came from a wide range of public and private institutions, but they all kind of converge on a number of criteria that they found that were important. Things like research and scholarly creativity, grant support, or peer-reviewed publications. But what was really interesting is that teaching, collegiality, and institutional service were the things that were most susceptible to the social influence process of deliberation. Those were the things that were most susceptible to being convinced by a committee that these things are important. We found that was particularly interesting in terms of who spoke up to defend these things, whether it was women, whether it was the minority individuals around the table. So that was really an interesting aspect of the study. What we're really hoping is to seek grant funding that will allow us to really broaden the simulation, and also looking at virtual online tools to see how we can do this instead of bringing people all to one site to actually formally craft the simulation. So if you're interested in this work, I'd love to talk more with you, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Miller. Our next presenter will be Dr. Donna Goche, an associate professor in the School of Nursing, College of Nursing and Allied Health Professions. The presentation will be Diversity in Healthcare.
Thank you. Diversity in healthcare and in the nursing profession, of which I've been a member for 40 years, is very important to us, be it gender or ethnicity, because we're certainly concerned about the healthcare outcomes of all the populations we serve. I don't know if the organizers know that April is the National Minority Health Month. Research does confirm that the percentage of ethnic minorities in healthcare professions is associated with the continued healthcare disparities in the minority populations that they actually serve. So who are we serving? We see that Louisiana is 63% white and 37% of the population is minority. What does the RN workforce look like in Louisiana, and how does that impact? What are those associations? The diversity of Louisiana's RN is not very diverse. 81% of our RN population in Louisiana is white, and about 19 to 20% are minorities. The gender gap is pretty wide also. Closer to home, I don't have the, no, that's all right. Closer to home, you can see Region 4, the Lafayette Regional Labor Market Area. 37% of the population in our market area is minority, but only 12% of the RN workforce in this area is minority. So the gender gap is there also. Females make up 51% of the RN workforce in Louisiana. No, they make up the total population, but I'm representative of 89% of the RNs in the state. So the gender gap is very real. Nursing is very high at the top of the list for projected growth. About 69,000 qualified applicants were turned away from nursing schools last year because of the faculty shortage. Faculty shortage is very real across gender and minorities, but it's critical. The underrepresented minorities in nursing education at the faculty level is critical. Looking at that, you may think that nursing profession doesn't even respect diversity. Minority students may find it very difficult to find mentors. This again is closer to home. The data on faculty and students in undergraduate and graduate programs, you can see from 60 to 70% of students and faculty are white, and the other percentage is the minorities. Also, nursing school at the administrative level and the faculty level nationwide is definitely gender skewed and racially homogenous. So that impacts our ability to recruit. So here we come with making an association with healthcare disparities. Healthcare disparities exist. If you're Black, Latino, Asian, or American Indian, you'll have worse healthcare outcomes. And that's just a sample of them. A very persistent healthcare disparity in the United States is the fact that African Americans have the highest rate of hypertension in all U.S. populations. Closer to home, AHRQ reviews healthcare quality measures annually across states. And in the state of Louisiana, you can see that African Americans, 25% of the time, are very far from benchmark. Some of those benchmarks are 400% off of the national and state benchmark. So we've got some work to do. Hispanic women in Louisiana have the third highest rate for not having a Pap test. Black women, third highest rate in the United States for giving birth to low birth weight babies. And African Americans who at high risk for the flu don't get the flu shot. A poignant story about problems with communication. Recent study, if you were listening to NPR coming into work last week, you heard UVA researchers in their study on 222 white medical students and residents. They still have false beliefs about the differences in the biology of race. So academic nursing leaders are very aware of this issue. There is money available for programs to improve their diversity pipeline. And we certainly want to, in the graduate nursing program, are very interested in doing that because we know the evidence shows that we do have to increase we've got to intensify and strengthen the diversity of the pipeline from which our healthcare professional and nursing workforce comes. We know that research says we still have these biases we have to work on. I like this factoid because RNs have two pathways, an associate degree or baccalaureate degree in the United States. Minority nurses, they're the majority of the population who starts their RN career at the baccalaureate level. We know diversity improves health. So recruiting nursing in our graduate nursing programs takes these factors into consideration. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Vasquez. Next, we're going to hear from Dr. Michael Dunaway, PhD. He's Director of the National Incident Management Systems and Advanced Technologies, known as NIMSTAT, Department of Civil Engineering. His presentation today is Mapping Community Leadership.
Good afternoon to everyone. I'm real glad to be here. I want to talk about us. I want to talk about our community, the community of Lafayette, the community of us as a university. I've been here now for about 10 months. I'm a new member of the faculty. I live in Annapolis, Maryland, and I'm a new member of the Lafayette community. And during the period of time that I've been here, I've found remarkably that it really lives up to this motto. I grew up in a small town in Missouri in the 60s, and this town reminds me a lot of what I grew up with as a child. It's much different from the metropolitan area of Washington, D.C., where I come from. But as you know, we've had a recent challenge to our community and to its cohesion. And this is not a small challenge, this is a crisis. And a lot of communities in the country have suffered from this same circumstance. Remarkably, at the end of the day that crisis happened, I live on Johnson Street, so I drive up and down it every day. At the end of that day, these were cropping up all over the city. By the end of the second day, 48 hours later, they were on virtually every lamppost and signpost going all the way down Lafayette, or down Johnson Street. So the question I wanted to ask, how does a community transcend a crisis? And I don't mean simply survive one, or simply get by and come together where we need to. I mean, how do you actually transcend a crisis of that sort? So I launched a research project. This is in progress right now. It's before the National Science Foundation under evaluation. It is already being sponsored by the National Institute of Science and Standards and Technology under a nonprofit out of the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy called US Ignite. And here's what we're going to do. We're going to conduct an analysis of the impact of that crisis on the community of Lafayette. We've got really good support from the Department of the Sheriff, the Police Department, the Department of Emergency Management. And then out of that analysis, we're going to develop a risk-based GIS analysis system to understand the leadership structure of the community of Lafayette. So here's what a leadership structure looks like. Some of you may be familiar with this. This is Game of Thrones. This analysis was run to determine the separation between one character's mention of his name and 15 words spread between the mention of another name. And here's some of the analysis for this make-believe diabolical community in a novel using the social network analysis tool. For those of you that are quick studies, here's an analysis of a real diabolical community. This was this wasn't from one of the three-letter agencies in D.C. It was actually done by a researcher. But three-letter agencies in Washington, D.C. are using this tool all the time to understand the money flows, the transactions, the communications, and leadership networks of bad guys. My question is, how can we use that same tool to understand the leadership network of the good guys, the people that bring the community together and make it stronger? How do we understand where a community finds its strength in a crisis? So here's a GIS map of the city of Lafayette. We're all, at this stage, we're probably all familiar with geographic information system mapping, where we take layers of the systems that constitute a community and we lay them on top of one another and we graph them. Here's what we cannot do. We have no tool to tell us what the community's civic infrastructure looks like, what its population looks like, how we graph it, how do we understand its relationship, particularly if we look at it of layers of pieces of the community and how they all come together to form a cohesive whole. And we can't take that map and insert it into the graph structure that we actually have for the way a community's infrastructure looks. So we have an incomplete understanding of what the real resources of a community are. So this project is aimed to get an understanding of what the leadership map of our community actually looks like through some fairly sophisticated mathematical analysis, of which the expert for that is one of the experts we have here on this campus, is Tanisha. So she's a member of this project. Here are the other members of this project. It's a very diverse group, spans a really broad spectrum of the university, plus some researchers, some research sources outside, like the Acadian Ambulance, the United Way of Acadiana, and the Water Institute out of Baton Rouge are going to participate in this. And our goal is to develop a technology, a system that will help us understand what leadership looks like. So then we can apply that to a place like the university. And we can ask the question, what does the leadership structure of the university look like, particularly among the student body? So to get to that, I want to announce a group under the Community Interest, Diversity, and Poverty that we're forming up called United We Lead, or You Lead. So we're going to be talking about that today at the group that we're with. Tanisi and I are going to lead the organization of this, and if you're interested, we'd like to talk to you after this session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Donovan. Next, we're going to be hearing from Dr. Jeff Stewart, who is Department Head, Department of Marketing and Hospitality. His presentation is called Influencing Community Resilience.
Good afternoon. So today what I'm going to do is present a little research framework that we have on community resilience. At the same time, I'm going to challenge some of the conceptualizations of one of our major constructs in there, and also talk about some of the opportunities that we have for future research. So we start with public-private collaboration. And in looking at this is not a new concept. It's something that's happened in other industries, in particular with infrastructure. But we're looking at it in response to major natural or man-made disasters, and how we could use that, leverage it, to really influence some of the activities that are needed for a community to respond. In particular, one big area is critical infrastructure and key resources. And in looking at critical infrastructure, a lot of times we see it as physical infrastructure. Key resources, looking at things like finances. Well, we need these elements of our community if we're ever going to respond to things like flooding in New Orleans East, which we saw after Hurricane Katrina and some of the challenges there. What we do know is that these storms help us focus. And when we focus, we see different sectors descend upon those areas. And in doing so, they all come with a specific purpose, and they're all well-intentioned. But we have to recognize that we have competing values. They're all driven by a different purpose. And in being driven by that purpose, one of the things that happens is we have a little bit of myopia that creeps in, because everybody's focused on their job. In looking at our research framework, I think we also have some myopia in there. Just with the way that we approach our research, the way that we live our lives, the way that we or the things that we're actually exposed to. For example, if we look at the success of a city, CEOs for cities made a presentation in Lafayette a few years ago and said that 58% of Lafayette's success was dependent on one variable, the number of college graduates that lived in the city. It's almost like we get some kind of credit, right? We get $763 to offset those that don't have a college degree. Given my personal Google searches, and that's what the images that you're seeing are, I have a certain behavior, I have certain perspective on the world, and this is what I get exposed to. When I think of community, Google tells me I think of sunshine, blue skies, apple pie, everything's great. But we know that's not the case, right? We have crumbling infrastructure. We have poor living conditions. We have poverty. We have inequity. We have all of those types of things. The challenge becomes for us, if we're going to influence the resiliency of communities, how do we influence it every day of the week? Because these major issues are the storms. They're the real storms. These are the things that we have. But these are also reflective of the capabilities within our community to respond to these critical incidents. What we saw in New Orleans East was a catastrophe. But it wasn't just a natural disaster. It was a catastrophe that had been going on for decades. So as we look at that same infrastructure, what we see was that levees broke and those kind of things, but for some reason we thought before people were going to be able to help themselves. Actually, over 40% of the population lived at below $17,000 a year of household income. 120,000 people depended on public transportation to get to work. But when the storm came, we said, get out. And you should have gotten out on your own. So it's very, very myopic. Research is needed to help us break down these silos. Currently, government and the private sector don't realize that the voter and the customer at Walgreens are the same person. Now that's, sounds kind of crazy, but it's the truth. We also don't know that, mindset plays a huge role in the resilience of communities. We have an example here locally in Delcom. If you look at Carol Dweck's work of growth mindset, Delcom had a growth mindset. They saw Rita as an opportunity to turn a catastrophe, which was the decline of the seafood industry. They didn't bellyache, over the flooding. They turned it, they used traditional tools to do untraditional things. They saw government funding at that time as a way of reversing some of the things that were persistent in their community prior to. Additionally, we need other research to help extend this type of example to start looking at other things like business incentives. So challenging those things to where we're not just looking at job credits, research and development, but can we do it in ways that impact our community? What we saw in New Orleans this week, Tyrann Mathieu, a football player, came out and he called it. He said, if New Orleans put as much effort into the kids of New Orleans as they do in bringing a Super Bowl or Essence Festival or Jazz Festival into the community, we could make a difference. So after these presentations, I need some assistance. I need some bifocals. I need to be able to expand the perspective on our research. Our fields deserve it. I think what y'all do in the social sciences, in a lot of cases, could impact the things that we do in disaster management and help us look at a broader perspective on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Stewart. Next, we're going to hear from Dr. Raju Godamakala. He's going to talk about visual analytics of large-scale time-varying graphs. He's Director of Research Informatics Research Institute.
Thank you. So my talk is going to be a little different because I'm a computer engineer and a computer scientist. But I kind of wanted to present what big data can do for you. So basically, I work in the area of graphs. Graphs represent some kind of interaction between components. We're surrounded by hopelessly complex systems, right? Where systems of people, infrastructures, organizations, and so on. So the picture that you saw on the first slide is a Facebook graph which has a billion nodes and more than 100 billion edges. So my research is how do you model, analyze, visualize these extremely complex graphs. And then the specific area of graphs that I'm really interested in is an area called evolutionary graphs, where you introduce something called as time into the graph. Okay, so you can have a node, an edge, appear, disappear over time. You can see the graph changing over time and so on. So why are they interesting big data problem? Because these graphs are hard to store, process, analyze, visualize. And you're increasingly finding these graphs in many applications like analyzing social networks, traffic dispersion graphs, infrastructure networks, epidemiology networks, and so on. So, with existing tools that you have, computer-based tools that you have, it's just not possible to manage and make decisions on these graphs. So we are using a framework, a visual analytics framework, which is basically looking at, kind of engineering this analytic system from ground up, so that they're much more interactive, they're a little more cognitive than what you've been used to in standard desktop and computer-based tools that you've been used to. Think of this as smartphone and what you do to communications and how you interact with this information. Can you bring the same level of smartness to these analytic tools? So in the past two slides, what you're seeing is basically a visual analytics sandbox that we're actually building to an NSF grant at our institute. And so why are we doing all this research? Why, right? So that's the big question. And I'm just going to talk about some of the motivating applications that we're actually developing that actually leverages this big data framework. So one of the projects that really a motivational project for me to kind of work on this is actually it's actually what happened during Rita, where people were affected, and it was an evacuation disaster where people could not get out. And this was because people didn't have an understanding of the fuel supply chain and the traffic supply chain, right? So the map that you're seeing is a model that we developed and results we produced for the state to better understand the fuel supply chain, the traffic and fuel supply chain is more or less gas. And then we also developed models, better models to predict infectious diseases like flu, where we were looking at how the disease spreads, and also we took into account some of the environmental factors that affect flu to make better prediction. And this is also a very interesting application where where we were able to construct the social networks, and we were able to construct something called as word concurrence graphs from Twitter that allow us to understand what events are evolving in social media, or what events and sub-events are evolving in social media. And this also has strong applications in cybersecurity to detect attack graphs and malware spread and so on. And this is another project where we were able to understand the risk for a levy by through data that we're collecting from sensors that actually measure the health of the levy in real time. As you can see, we've used different types of interfaces. We use touch interface for graphs because it allows you to select multiple nodes at the same time and query them and so on. We also used a 3D interface where that will allow you to basically see a lot more data than what you're able to see using a 2D display. So why is this relevant? Why is this relevant to this presentation and to this community here? So deriving insights from data is highly interdisciplinary. It's very interdisciplinary. Okay, so I was reading an article recently about a researcher from the University of California, San Diego, where he actually developed a network model to actually better track human trafficking. Okay, so he was able to collect all of these profiles and metadata and all of this, and was able to construct these graphs to prevent human trafficking. So that's a great example of how computational linguists, sociologists, computer scientists, people who are studying, who are in law enforcement, kind of came together to solve a grand challenge. So big data is really transforming how and it's transforming our society in how we actually tackle these problems and the rapidity of how we can solve these problems. So I'm here to kind of learn more about any challenge that we want to be able to tackle together.
Thank you, Dr. Zaramacala. Next, we're going to be hearing from Dr. Gail Bonhomme. She's going to talk about subsidized savings plans for low-income college students. Dr. Bonhomme is Project Director, Student Support Services, a federal TRIO program housed in University College.
Thank you all. Home ownership, a college education, and entrepreneurial opportunities are three of the main paths to financial independence in this country. If we are to secure a new grant that we're targeting, we have the ability to ensure lifelong self-sufficiency for hundreds of UL Lafayette students who are low income. And this is a huge agenda for federal agencies that are targeting these populations for lots of reasons. So how do we expect to take low-income students and magically turn them into those financial gurus so that they no longer need government assistance in order to subsist? Well, our proposal is to explore the impact of subsidized savings plans on college students, and we have room for a few faculty members who want to join our team. So through a demonstration grant, we have an opportunity to explore how our proposed intervention might work. We hope to evaluate the process involved in helping low-income college students set up and maintain individual development accounts, or IDAs as we call them. Now our plan, we are required to do a couple of things. First, we have to offer ways to build the students' asset management skills, and we do have some evidence-based tools that we're going to use for that. Next, we have to offer a solid plan to help students start a savings account, not to exceed about $2,000 over a 5-year period. Now, the objective is for them to save $1 or about $400 rather per year to start their IDA nest egg upon graduating. That may not seem like a lot of money, only about $1 a day, but savings and the savings process impacts their lifelong ability to become financially secure. We teach them a whole lot of things, but many of them are leaving without those asset management skills. And of course, we have to study the barriers, because we know not all of them are going to reach perfection. Our plan must require the students to save $1. For every $1 they save, we have to match it with $1 from the grant, and then we have to get a non-federal source so that students can save up to $6,000 over a 5-year period. Each student has to sign off on an asset spending plan before participating, and then after graduation, the money can be used for graduate school or to transition out of the job market. How many students do we know turn down good jobs because they can't travel? They don't have the funds to do so. We're discussing how our campus can use some campus funds because that is directly tied to our graduation rates. And then we have multiple campus partners helping us out. So what should our research team look like? Well, we're really open because it's such a broad topic. But overall, the funding agency is most interested in what aspects of a subsidized savings plan have the best outcomes for low-income college students. Using a mixed methodology, which is what we plan to use, will allow us to zero in on some key aspects that contribute to students' success or where they struggle and may not meet their goals in managing their savings plans. So with this research, our government leaders have better tools to help low-income families and individuals build assets for healthy living. The funders are most interested in evidence-based practices, of course, that influence public policy eventually, and that help low-income college students become viable taxpayers. That's the goal for all of us in our college communities. The overreaching question that we're focusing on is why, or will rather, subsidized savings accounts lead to increased financial stability for early career college low-income students. The main dimensions of this question provide opportunities for a diversity of scholarly interests, which brings us here today. Moreover, this remains a fundamental policy question at the national level that may impact some long-term financial security for low-income graduates and other individuals as well, because it has implications for other low-income populations. Whether we work with researchers from psychology or education to help us design some pre- and post-assessments for this project, or whether we work with informatics, some of them were on earlier, and we work with computer science faculty. We conduct predictive analyses with their talents, and Dr. Raju was a perfect transition into my presentation. We have room for great ideas and great people who will help us to pull this agenda together and do some great inquiry. And so we welcome all of your talents. The return on investment, not only to individuals, but to communities, to industry and governments, is really huge. And it's a primary interest to all these stakeholders. Therefore, we have to, another possibility is that we could work with an economist to help us find out return on investment. And so how do we help these low-income students go from being non-savers to savvy savers is the goal. We have two opportunities to apply for this grant later this year in October and again next year, but hopefully we can do that. And if we're funded, I'll say when we're funded, we have to move quickly, so good planning is important. And finally, once we're funded, we have some great support from University College through our TRIO programs because we are funded to serve vulnerable populations, which are primarily low-income students. And just this final thought in closing. When you talk about diversity, equity, and poverty, the asset gap is so much more impactful than the gap in income, which we hear a lot about. Certainly we're hearing a lot about it in our presidential race. But all of us at UL Lafayette have wonderful talents that we can contribute to improve this economy. And we're going to do it one student, $1, and one subsidized savings account at a time. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. Our next and final presentation is by Dr. Karen Burstein. She is the Executive Director of the Cecil Picard Center for Child Development and Lifelong Learning. She's going to speak on the topic, Rapid Response to an Epic Tragedy.
Good afternoon, everybody. I am the last speaker today, and I would like to thank all of the presenters that came before me. These were wonderful presentations upon which my topic is building. We've heard fascinating discussions on the nature of diversity, on models of equity and interventions and responses to community disasters. I'd like to end our discussion today by describing one community's attempt to address the needs of families and children amid the Great Recession. Poverty is the bright line by which the majority of other social metrics are measured. Addressing poverty is fundamental, and yet its intractable nature remains frustrating for bureaucrats and communities and researchers. Sunrise in Phoenix, Arizona is a vista of promise and prosperity. It's a dream in the desert. We all think of Phoenix as the Phoenix bird rising from the ashes. This is a picture I took at sundown in the shadows of those beautiful buildings. and it becomes a nightmare for hundreds of people who are homeless in Phoenix, Arizona. Poverty is a mess. We have issues. We had over 22,000 people a night sleeping in the streets in Phoenix, Arizona, in this beautiful city. During the first half of the first decade of the 21st century, we saw relative stability in homelessness and hunger in Phoenix. However, come 2008 and 2010, we saw a giant leap of over 40%. A group of us, nonprofit executives and researchers and public partners, came together and said, we must do something. Our government system was fractured. We could no longer handle the influx because not only did we have 4.5 million people in the city of Phoenix and surrounding Maricopa County, we also had numbers coming from our rural communities who had no place to go. So we said, how do we get all of us under one umbrella? Silos, silos, silos. We hear that in every federal grant. Break down the silos, work together. So that's what we attempted to do. And as a result of that, we formed an organization called the Maricopa Family Support Alliance with a $100,000 grant from a local philanthropy. Our goals were, we had a large vision, but it looked at asset mapping. We talked about asset mapping repeatedly today, and this is a model where we used asset mapping to bring together 1,700 services for people throughout the county. Here is one of the results. This is called Find Help Phoenix. Find Help Phoenix is an online asset map tool for families, and this is the second iteration. There are 1,700 services in here, and they're organized, they're either free or low cost, and they're organized under 14 different major headings. We looked at this from a different perspective and had originally 40 headings, with much more specificity, but we've got it down and we've organized it all. The next thing we'll see is this is what a family might find if they went and looked for mental health and addictions. We linked it to Google Maps. We have a brief description and access to their website and the ability to share it. The beauty of this system is the individual can use it. It's in Spanish and in English. So what? So it's free. It's very easy to navigate. It is used multiple platforms. It's bilingual. We had 100,000 hits a year, 50,000 services, greater than 50,000 services attributable to the model. We trained over almost 2,000 professionals, social workers, teachers, all of our different friends, and 1 million little cards, depending on the card, in the hands of our families in need. It's become a very effective tool. The woman that was our leader on this received the National Social Worker of the Year Award from her organization. So now what? We're now in year 3 on this project. We have to look and fill what unmet needs exist, determine the quality of the services that are out there, track users who then become a support to others. That's inherent in our model. And help families become strong and healthy. We'd like to share with you this notion, really briefly, that we all are a family, whether we have mental illness, whether we have a disability, whether we are poor, we all come from a family. So I offer you the ability to go to Find Help Phoenix, take a look at it. I think there's an opportunity for replication here. Thank you all for being with all of us today.
Thank you so much, and thank all the presenters. I'd like to remind you that there are handouts that need to be picked up out in the lobby, and you should grab those. We'd also like to remind you that we have provided some structure for meeting and visiting and developing projects together out in the atrium here, and that is we're going to ask you to move every 15 minutes. So if you stay with us for the next hour and you enjoy the refreshments and you visit and you talk to those people whose ideas you found particularly compelling, you're going to hear a bell ringing, and that bell ringing is a kind of a signal. Sorry for the Pavlovian elements, to to get up and go talk to somebody else.
For
But,
making
we
this happen.
would like you to make
Typically,
multiple
in the 3.5, 4 years that I've been Vice President for Research, I have run into a lot of interesting research on our campus where we have extraordinary faculty doing phenomenal things. And what I found is that while we do extraordinary things within our own areas of focus, the real beauty of research is the opportunity to transcend our discipline and cut across multiple disciplines. And it seemed like we didn't do enough to facilitate that. Not that we needed to direct it by any stretch of the imagination, but on our campus, we did fuel that engine, if you will, by...
The preceding program was made possible in part with production assistance provided by AOC Community Media.